Yo book nerds, you guys know that I love my classics, and so today I wanted to talk about classics, and I wanted to kind of give you guys my definition of what a classic is and why I love them so much. If you try to find an official definition of a classic, you'll get a lot of different answers, and so I thought it would be beneficial to tell you guys how I classify them so that you will know when watching my videos what exactly I'm referring to. So when I talk about classics, I divide classics into three different types. There's modern classics, classics, and ancient classics. So those are my three categories when I talk about classics. So for me, I define modern classics as books that are 50 to 100 years old. So I've pulled some examples off of my shelves to kind of show you guys. So some examples of modern classics would be S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, or J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. These are just some examples of what I define as modern classics. But obviously there are many, many more. Age obviously isn't the only classification of a classic. It is the main classification, but the other classification is that as books age and go into these different categories, they have to remain popular and remain in print. You have to be able to find these books. If they disappear and there are no more copies in the world, then it's not a classic anymore because it doesn't exist anymore. And unfortunately, that does happen to books. So that is the other reason why I'm making this video too, is because I want classics to stay in print and I want them to survive the test of time. And we need to find those obscure titles that are starting to drift out of existence and hold on to them as long as we can. So moving on to the next category, which is just classics. I define classics as books that are 100 years old to 1,000 years old. So for example, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer or anything by Mark Twain would be a classic. Persuasion or anything else by Jane Austen, also classic. And of course, Hamlet or anything else by Shakespeare. Obviously, there are tons and tons of other books and authors that are in this classics range. And so this is the era of books that people most commonly associate with the word classic literature. And so that's why it's kind of a really broad range too. A lot of people only have two categories of classics. They have modern classics and then they have classics. So other people might define classics as anything over 100 years old. I like to break classics down into the three categories instead because I think once a book is over 1,000 years old, it deserves some distinction because it has survived that long. And so my third category is ancient classics, which I define as anything over 1,000 years old. And so some examples of this would be Ovid's The Metamorphoses, Plato's The Republic or anything else by Plato, and Lysistrata or Lysistrata, however you pronounce it, I've heard it both ways, which is by Aristophanes or anything else by Aristophanes, or any of the other ancient Greek plays. So these would be some examples of ancient classics. And so those are my three categories of classics, and I hope that helps you to define what they are a little bit better. That is how I define them when I talk about them on my channel. It's by no means an official definition because I have yet to actually find any kind of official definition. I find so many conflicting ones online. Nobody seems to agree on what a classic actually is. So that is my definition. Moving on to why do I love classics so much? That is a great question. I have always been interested in classic literature ever since I was little. When I was in middle school and junior high, I was already reading Pride and Prejudice. I read Wuthering Heights. I read Gone with the Wind. I read all of these outside of class on my own time. They weren't part of my school curriculum. I just have always found them fascinating. And I think that the best way for me to explain why I love classics so much is actually by reading a passage to you from Ovid's The Metamorphoses. And it's at the very end, so if you don't want spoilers, I guess just skip this part, but I don't really consider this a spoiler because this whole book is filled with just short little stories. And so like, it's not really a spoiler because this is not a novel. And so you could actually read bits and pieces of it just fine. And so this is the last paragraph that Ovid wrote in this book. And now my work is done, which neither the wrath of Jove, nor fire, nor sword, nor the gnawing tooth of time shall ever be able to undo. When it will, let that day come which has no power but over this mortal frame, and end the span of my uncertain years. Still in my better part I shall be born immortal far beyond the stars, and I shall have an undying name. Wherever Rome's power extends over the conquered world, I shall have mention on men's lips, and if the prophecies of bards have any truth, through all the ages shall I live in fame. So basically what Ovid is saying is that because he wrote this, his body will die, but he will live on. His mind, his thoughts, the better part of him will live on, immortal, and people will be talking about him forever. And that is true. His name has lived on. People do still talk about him. It's believed that Ovid finished this around 8 AD, and so it's over 2,000 years old. And we're still talking about him, and we're still talking about this work, and that is just incredible. And I think that's really what the draw of classic literature has for me. I love the idea that people live on, immortal in literature, and it just fascinates me. All of the authors that I've mentioned, and even the ones that I haven't mentioned, there are so many, I can't list them all. All of these classic authors are living on immortally through their books. And I think that is the beautiful thing about classic literature. They survive the test of time. And I just think that's amazing. If you aren't a war hero or some other famous person in history, how else are you going to live on forever after you die? You write a great story and you will live on in your great work of literature. I just find that fascinating. So that is why I love classic literature so much. I love history. I love the idea of living on immortally forever. And literature can connect us across thousands of years, and that's beautiful. I literally can sit down and read the thoughts of people that lived 2,000 years ago, and that is amazing to me. That is why I love my classics so much. This is how I define my classics when I'm talking about them. I hope this video is helpful to you in helping you categorize and define what classics are. If you agree with my categories and definitions, or if you disagree, drop down in the comments and we can talk about it. And please tell me why you love classic literature if you do. And if you don't like classic literature, let me know why you don't. And we can have some really great conversations. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. I'll see you guys next Monday. Thanks for talking books with me.